What is up, everybody? I wanted to do a little video talking about kind of my thoughts on Overwatch after coming back and playing a little bit here. As of them switching it back to Overwatch 1, title wise, and then adding those 5 characters and everything. Um, Sort of my perspective from somebody who used to play the game a lot more, but kind of grew grew away from it, I guess. I stopped playing it um, quite heavily. Probably, I mean, I think definitely by 2018, 2019, I started playing it less. And then I didn't play it. I haven't really played it much up until recently for a couple years. I didn't play Overwatch 2 for very long. I probably played it for maybe 6 months originally when it came out, and then I stopped playing it. I just didn't like it very much. Um, but yeah, I'm not going to get into that fully right now, at least. But start out, I guess I want to talk about sort of thoughts on new characters and sort of their new schedule regarding that. Um, I think it is good the game is moving towards trying to actively support it a bit more, more content, more characters on a much faster pace. I think Overwatch, especially, I'd say like post 2019, I think has really struggled with that. I think they only really release a character maybe once every 4 months, and a big issue with that is typically we get maybe one character per role a year, and that's like if it is one character per role, and some years it hasn't been that. We've maybe gotten 2 of a role, so we've had periods of time where maybe we go like a year and like 4 months without getting a character on a specific role, especially in a game where you already have far more DPS characters than the other 2 roles. It can feel kind of weird. And depending on the characters themselves when they come out, if the character isn't particularly well designed or if the character isn't very good, it in a lot of cases feels like there wasn't even really a new character released, especially if they don't get played much. It can often make the game feel like nothing really changed too much and that we're kind of just playing the same thing. I know there's probably more hardcores out there who don't really enjoy constant hero releases. But I think at least for the casual audience who kind of likes playing every once in a while or coming back and playing in spurts, or people who don't really play this type of game religiously, for them I think that makes it much more interesting. We'll have to see kind of how the rest of the characters that come out this year play, but for what I've seen, at least on a surface level, and I haven't really figured out how to play all the new characters fully or anything, but on a surface level at least, their designs seem decent. I think they do actually change the game up, which is good. I kind of get into some of my other problems with some of the current formats of the game, and why I kind of think, after a couple months, this game's probably going to kind of fall back into that sort of stagnant period again. And this is kind of an issue with live service games in general, that after it's kind of a start of a new season and maybe a drop of stuff, after a period of time, people kind of disappear, usually a couple weeks. A lot of the more casual people kind of disappear and go play other stuff because there is so much to play. And I'll kind of talk about why I think that's going to happen with Overwatch. And that's not something, again, that's exclusive to this game. It's a problem across the industry with live service multiplayer games. But I think it is good. In terms of the game itself, I do think, at least in terms of adding new stuff, I think the sort of the new role passives and the subclasses, I should say, and the perks, I think they do add a new element to the game. Do I think they're like absurdly game changing? No. I don't hate them or anything. I'm not like super giddy about them. I definitely think, again, we've kind of moved away from the old Overwatch, and I'm kind of accepting that's not really ever going to come back. I think a lot of the people who play this game in the modern day don't want that, so that's not going to happen. But you know, I don't mind those. I think it is, you know, like I've said, I think that at least they've tried to mix things up. I think there was, again, a long period of time where they just didn't really do much outside of maybe doing some balance changes here and there. Which, again, I don't think really... I think a big problem is a lot of people think balance is the most important thing, but with a multiplayer game, but to me, it's kind of the gameplay loop. It's design of things... it's fun factor. It's a lot of other things matter more. I think really terrible balance can negatively impact the game and make people, you know, enjoy it less for sure. But I think people can get a little hung up on that in a lot of cases, especially when in some cases, you know, bad game design can make balancing things impossible or make bad balance seem even worse. Or make it impossible to even balance the game in a way that feels good, right? They can make it so difficult to balance that it's just not even doable, really. I think people don't focus enough on that. I think there's too much of that sort of mindset that it's like, you know, everything has to be perfectly balanced. And, you know, only in that case will the game even be fun. I care more about having design that's fun and trying to find design that is anti-fun and get rid of it. I think that is more important for the long-term health of a game in general. If you have stuff that's anti-fun, people aren't going to stick around to play your game. I think that is a big thing. Just and probably even at any rank, you know, anybody, even the top players, probably don't want mechanics that are inherently anti-fun. You know, I think the best players are often more willing to put up with that stuff. I think very casual audiences are more willing to move on if they find something really unfun to do. They're not going to stick with it, you know, and hope for change. They're just going to move on to the next thing. And in that way, they're almost less lenient. You know, I think maybe really high-end, you know, high-ranked players are more willing to be openly critical of the game, but still play it, whereas casual people aren't going to really get mad at the game. They're just going to stop playing it entirely and move on. But regarding this, how it is currently, I think they have, you know, added enough stuff that it is going to keep people interested for some time. I think some older heads have come back and have been, you know, had a decent time playing the game again. Probably the most fun they've had in a while, which is good. But for me, you know, and I think this game mechanically is still good. There's definitely a lot of stuff I still prefer in this game to Marvel Rivals. And there's stuff about Rivals I like as well, but, you know, there's stuff I definitely prefer in this game. I do think this game is inherently more competitive on average, but I'm going to get into why, even though, you know, some of these changes do make the game feel more fresh, I think some of the systemic issues this game has had for years and years have really not been fixed or addressed. And ultimately, I think that's the reason why I'm probably not going to play this game for too long, or too much longer, to be honest. I don't really know what I'm going to play multiplayer-wise, to be honest. I think there's a lot of stuff that, unfortunately, I just don't think live service games as a whole are doing particularly great right now. On average. Not every live service game, but I think the only live service games that are doing well are not really my type of genre. It's kind of more of the extraction shooter or super tactical shooter sort of stuff. That's not really my stuff. I'm an arena shooter type guy. I like fast-paced games. That's kind of has always been my thing. But for me, coming back and playing this game again, you know, I thought, okay, I'll play 6v6. I do prefer it. But, you know, I played 6v6 maybe a month or two ago, and I actually had a pretty decent time playing it, despite not definitely being rusty, not winning a lot of games, I still had a decent time playing it, despite that, because it felt a bit closer to the old game than anything in this game I'd played in a while. But as of the season 0 or is it season 1? Season 1 patch. I had gone back and played it again, and something felt off. Like, playing it, definitely something felt different. And obviously there was the role passives and stuff and the perks, and, well, there was already perks before that, but, there was, like, the new passives and stuff. But, there was something else. Like, I was kind of sensing it. There was something else that felt off, and I couldn't really put my finger on what it was, and then I ended up looking through the patch notes, and I noticed that they had made it so, and this was formerly a DPS passive that I believe they had taken out of the game? Could be wrong. Because I think they had been tweaking how much, what percentage it was for quite some time, trying to find a balance, but not really ever making it be able to feel like it fit in the game. But it was basically a passive where you reduce healing based on what target you're shooting. Now, this is a little different from that, but it's kind of the same concept. Essentially, at this point, you get 30% less healing while in combat, and they've opted to give that to basically all roles. I believe it was on DPS before, but they've opted to give that to both support and tank. And this, honestly, at least in 6v6, it feels terrible. I suspect that this change was done for 5v5, and I'm assuming it's because of tanks. I'm assuming it's because of tanks feeling too durable, and they wanted to try and find a way to make tanks more killable. And I will say, I mean, trying to play tank in 5v5, I mean, Jesus, I was exploding a lot trying to play it. But it feels really bad in 6v6, with there being obviously more damage because there's more players. It feels very bursty. What I would say is it kind of feels, and obviously I wouldn't say it's as extreme as Rivals, but it feels like Marvel Rivals Light, in that, depending on, and this is an issue with Rivals, where, if you're only playing, 2 supports in Rivals, often, especially at lower ranks, the damage can feel really high. So often that's why supports have been just so ridiculous in Rivals healing-wise, because they're trying to sort of negate that really high amounts of damage you can do with the DPS role and the amount of burst damage you can do with ultimates and stuff. That's why they've made healing and support ult so crazy in Rivals, but it felt really, really weird. Playing tank didn't feel as good as before. Because of the less healing, it felt like it's much easier to blow up, especially if you're not chaining cooldowns together extremely well, or if you make a slight positioning error, it's basically instant death. And for me, like, it made support not as fun to play either. I haven't been playing support recently really at all. I haven't been having fun playing support either, generally. I've had more fun playing DPS and tank, and this is coming from somebody that, at least predominantly on PC Overwatch, I mean, I used to play console Overwatch back in, like, 2017, but as somebody who's predominantly played PC Overwatch since, I don't know, like, 2019, I was mainly a tank support flex. That was mainly what I played. I'd mainly play off tank, and then off support. And I could play a bit of hit scan DPS too, but that wasn't obviously my preferred role. That was probably my least preferred role out of the 3, but I could play it. But, now I'm leaning towards DPS and tank, because healing definitely feels, I wouldn't say it's inherently bad, but it has kind of put the game in a state where the strongest, and I know people have said this before, but the strongest healers are almost a necessity now. Playing like an off support or a character who doesn't have as much much healing output is not really doable in a 2-2-2 setting, at least in the 6v6 mode. You know, I get it. Someone's gonna say, well, they don't balance around that. Obviously they don't. But you know, for me, it's I don't even know if it makes 5v5 feel as fun. Generally speaking, I think that passive being only on DPS is fine in a 5v5 format. I would get rid of it entirely in 6v6, but in a 5v5, I at least was hoping that if they were going to do this, it would only be a 5v5 change, but unfortunately this affects the entire game. I think, like, it makes support less enjoyable to play as well. And like I said, it like, and this has been a problem for a while. It makes the weaker healers not playable in a 2-2-2 comp. And this is the same problem Rivals has been having, in that Rivals has had a triple support problem for a while. And part of it is because there's support characters in Rivals who do less healing. They're kind of a pseudo DPS. They're kind of a DPS healer hybrid. We've had these characters for a long time, but these characters, because of the way these games are, you can't really play them as a second healer because they don't do enough. So what happens is it pushes the game to be, especially in an open queue format, to being a 3 supports sort of deal. And because it's triple support, that often makes the sustain not feel as good. But the problem is, in some cases, it almost feels necessary, especially in 6v6 in this game. I think it feels necessary to play 3 support, especially in some circumstances. It's like, especially on any map with a choke, or where you're having to play in a very condensed area where the damage is going to be spiking much higher, it feels really bad to play anything other than 3 support. And I think you almost have to play 2 tanks because you need to be able to generate more ult charge for your supports, because if you play a 2 DPS composition, then you just don't generate enough ult charge on your support players, and you're going to be behind an ult economy because of that. So it creates this meta where it's like a 2 tank, 3 support meta. It undermines DPS, I think, and makes the game just feel less fun in general, because it makes the game feel like you can't punch through things as well. Especially in Rivals, you can't punch through shit unless you ult combo. This game, it's not as bad, but it still makes fights feel like they drag. But, you know, I think it's kind of an issue where, and sure, maybe you could argue that if you don't reduce healing, then, you know, maybe triple support becomes too prominent, right? But I don't think this is the way of fixing it. I don't think reducing healing across the board, basically, is the way to go about it. And it makes all the roles feel worse in general. It just makes the game feel worse. I don't like the time to kill feeling super fast in a hero shooter like this. I play these games for the slightly slower time to kill. I'm not looking to play a deathmatch. I'm not looking to play COD. I like the strategic element of hero shooters. That's why I played them in the past. And that's really my only interest in them nowadays, especially. There's just so much other stuff you can play if you want more of an arcadey, deathmatchy style game, but you know, maybe there's cases where, at least in 5v5, where there were certain supports that were probably healing too much, and that was maybe making, especially the tank, feel too tough to kill. Maybe in some cases it was making pocketing certain characters too hard to kill as well. I understand that, and I'm not and we'll get into 5v5, but I'm not a fan of the mode. I've never been a fan of it since the beta for Overwatch 2, and I've pretty much always said I don't think it was a good change and a good format idea. But, you know, to me, it doesn't really make sense to do these broad sweeping changes across the entire game, affecting every game mode, if it's a 5v5 change, because 5v5 is a very specific thing. And I just don't really like it. And it's unfortunate because I actually think I would have, without this change, I actually think 6v6 would be pretty fun. but I think it makes it less enjoyable. It makes it harder to approach as well. It's just inherently more punishing now, and not really in an enjoyable or fun way, or in a way that's, like, entertaining or engaging. It's just like, oh, everybody dies faster now. It's just, like, basically time to kill buff across the board. And it also, I think, encourages supports to just straight up heal bot people, especially if you're only playing 2 of them. You basically have to heal bot. It encourages less playmaking, which I don't think is good. I think the support role is more fun when you feel like you can make plays and you can do things other than just heal people. You know, there's a reason why the role is called support and not just healer, because, you know, you're supposed to be able to do other things, but when you change the role in that way, I don't really like it. And I think it's making it feel like 3 support is more of a necessity, which is the same problem, again, like Rivals is having. You know, we'll get into... I'll talk 5v5. I've always said it's not the right format for the game. I don't believe in getting rid of it. Obviously, the devs have put in a ton of work with 5v5. They've patched so much stuff. They've changed so much shit to try and make it work. I don't think it works still. And I don't think it ever will, because it's too difficult to balance for. I think it's too difficult to from a design perspective, because it's so asymmetrical. And I'm going to be straightforward. Like, I'm not somebody who's, like, a super massive fan of open queue, personally. But, I think there is a middle ground to be reached in a lot of cases with this stuff. But 5v5 is just not it. I felt this way for quite some time. Pretty much always one role feels terrible to play at all times. And it just kind of rotates back and forth between which role feels shitty. It didn't end up really helping queue times that much. I mean, it helped, but not significantly. Which was the main reason they did it. It was sort of a, oh, we need to keep player attention via this, right? That's what they were getting pushed by Activision probably to do. Excuse me. I would much prefer if 5v5 was kind of the side mode in this game. I know some people were advocating for getting rid of it entirely. I don't think that's a good idea, as I think there's a lot of people now that would quit if that was the case, if they got rid of 5v5. I think Stadium is also another mode that just shouldn't be prioritized heavily. It's just not... It's another one of these modes that is so difficult to sort of design and balance for because of how it plays. It's so different from regular Overwatch. But they've put so much time into it, and it's still not popular. You know, 6v6 open queue is still substantially more popular than Stadium, and Stadium in a 5v5 format I don't think feels that good either, but I don't know how it would play in 6v6. That's never been tested, so no idea how that would play out. So what I would probably do is move away from 5v5 being the primary mode. I would still obviously have 5v5 role queue. I know that's what people like. There's people now that like it, right? That are kind of the Overwatch 2 crowd. They didn't start playing the game until the Overwatch 2 came out. And I know they're never going to do it. I know they won't, because they see it as too much of a risk, even though I don't feel that it's a massive risk, but it is what it is. But I would advocate for 5v5, kind of switching places with 6v6, and what I would do is, I've always kind of, for a long time, I've said that I think we could find a balance between role lock and open queue. I don't like role lock either, because I think it makes the game too repetitive, and it also kind of ties you into certain roles. Obviously, you can't switch between roles at all. There's nobody on the team that can do that, so it's very hard to adapt to certain situations, depending on people's hero pools and counters. And, you know, on top of 6v6, role lock having queue time issues, partially because of balance issues, I think, but I also think role queue, puts pressure, I think, on the roles being balanced as well. Otherwise, queue times obviously suffer. but I also just think it makes the game more repetitive. Maybe it gets stale a bit faster from patch to patch because of everybody's playing the same sort of compositions. I think there is some fun compositions to be played. I'm not against triple tank. I'm not against triple DPS. I think in some cases, I think bringing out some unique stuff is kind of fun. I think you can hit people off guard with it as well, and I think it adds an extra skill element to the game, kind of knowing what compositions to play. But I've always advocated for a hybrid system. You know, I think you could still have a role queue, but it has to be obviously altered. What I would kind of do is you'd have your 3 main roles, obviously being your DPS, your tank, and your support. And then you would have a 4th role being flex. Now, flex is kind of a thing, is still a thing currently, but it's different from how I would have it work. How it works currently is it basically queues you for all roles, and then whatever role you get put on, you're stuck on that role for that game. What I would do is make the flex role kind of be the open queue element of the role queue. So I think for me, and I wouldn't say like, I think 2 support is the best sort of format in terms of like the number of supports that should be on every team, right? I think that's what feels the best. Obviously, less than 2 supports feels terrible. You don't get any heals. More than 2 supports often feels like there's too much healing in the game, and it makes the fights feel like a slog. So I think 2 is perfect. I think it feels good when you know you have 2 supports. You don't have to worry about that. You're not forcing people to have to fill on support if they don't want to. I think what I would do is I do 1 DPS player on each team. I would do 1 tank player. And I think for the reason for that is obviously I think the 1 DPS kind of keeps you from getting these metas where it's like goats, where you don't have DPS. The other thing is with the 1 tank is I think as somebody who plays off tank, I'm much more willing to play tank if I know I have somebody else to play tank with. I've always felt that way. I much prefer playing tank with somebody else versus playing solo tank in general, even in an open queue format, in a 6v6 format, 5v5 format. I feel I've always felt that way, that I much prefer to play with another tank player. So to me, having at least a guaranteed tank as somebody that is an off tank, I would be much more willing to play tank consistently if I knew I had somebody else to play with. And again, it puts less pressure on people to have to feel like they have to fill every fucking match, depending on what team is playing. And then I would do 2 flex players. And like I said, flex players would kind of work like how open queue works, where they can play different roles. Now, I think naturally people would suspect that flex would probably have the longest queue times. But what I would say with that is it would kind of self-regulate, because I think a lot of people, if they see flex as really long queue times, they'll just queue for the role they actually want to play, right? They'll queue for the role that maybe they're the most interested in playing. I think it'd be absolutely fine if you allow people to queue for multiple roles, and then they get dropped on whatever role, and it works like the current system, where, you know, they kind of want to alternate, so they don't only want to play one thing. I think that's completely fine. It would be kind of a built-in sort of flex, whereas, you know, the new flex would be like open queue. I think that would be fine. Otherwise, you know, maybe there's some other sort of format or alignment. Maybe you don't have a guaranteed DPS player, or a guaranteed tank, but I would prefer to have a guaranteed on each role. Or maybe you only have 1 player guaranteed on each role. It's 1 support, 1 tank, 1 DPS, and then you have 3 flex. But I also wouldn't prefer that, because I think you get these games where maybe multiple flex players would immediately lock 1 role, and then you might still have an issue where your team doesn't really complement each other, or they aren't really playing, you know, in a way that you can sort of play off each other. But I think that would be really good for the game. You know, 6v6 as it is currently, I don't think they're going to really ever support it, because, again, they just see it as a legacy mode, unfortunately. And there's a lot of games that are kind of like that, where they have kind of the old style of game, but they're not willing to support it. They're basically leaning in on the current game, or the current variation of the game. You know, in terms of this game versus Rivals, I don't really play Rivals much anymore either, because of you know, kind of the way, some of the design flaws in the game. I think healing is way too strong. I think alt charge, in Rivals especially, is way too fucking fast. I think it kills the neutral in the game. You know, I'm the type of person, at least in ranked in Rivals, I'd prefer if the alt charge was slower. I don't mind quick play having crazy fast charging alts. That's whatever. I know that's like supposed to be much more casual in that sense, and that's fine. But I think the issue with both of these games, I think quick play and ranked kind of need to try and differentiate from each other more. I think often both of these games, quick play and ranked, basically feel the same. It's just quick play is just ranked with, in a lot of cases, without MMR, or without MMR you can see at least. Obviously, there's always hidden MMR of some kind, and in the case of Rivals, potential EOMM. But I'm not going to get into that. But anyway, yeah, and like I to go back to like the point, talking about like hero releases, I am happy this game's releasing characters faster, but I actually, and maybe I'm an exception, but I'm not somebody who, I don't really like monthly hero releases personally, and the reason I don't like it is I feel that it's very tough, especially if you don't play these games religiously, to hop back in. When you have a hero release every month, let's say you don't play for 6 months for whatever reason, you know, maybe you're playing other stuff, life comes up, whatever. You come back to the game and there's 6 new characters in the game, and it's like, that's pretty jarring. It can be pretty jarring to have that much shit. Especially if some of these characters have heavily altered the way the game plays, or heavily altered the metagame, or whatever. It's very jarring as somebody that, if you're a more casual player, to come back and try to get into it. It feels kind of insurmountable at times almost. And I know you know, you could learn it in time, but you know, it feels kind of bad because you immediately feel like you're at just an absurdly massive disadvantage. Even if mechanically you're still very good, just in terms of game sense, you feel like you're at a massive disadvantage because of how the game is drastically changed so much. And I'm not advocating for, like, you know, only 3 heroes a year or anything, because I think that's definitely not enough. But for me personally, I think a good cadence, and I'm not a big Dead by Daylight fan. I think the game has pretty terrible design flaws, but I've always felt that, at least in terms of their cadence of releases, I think it's pretty decent. They typically release a new killer maybe every 3 months. I think that's generally fine. I think you could even speed it up a little more. Maybe every 2 months there's a character. You know, I think that way, if you released, you know, 2 characters, I mean, you could release 2 characters on each role a year, right? You know, it would be every 2 months you could do a new character, and there would be 2 characters on a role per year. So, you know, if for whatever reason one of the characters doesn't hit on a roll, that doesn't mean you get nothing, right? Because that kind of sucks when you're a player who obviously favors a role, and you know, you're only getting 1 character a year, and if you don't like that character, its design or how it plays or whatever, or it's very weak balance-wise, so you don't end up really playing it because of that, it feels bad because it's like, you know, you're not getting another character for a long fucking time. And again, it kind of is what makes some of these games feel stagnant. And maybe this game will be less stagnant because of the hero releases, but I think the issue is, I do think, I think the period of time that people are going to come back for with the new characters is going to get shorter and shorter, because a lot of people are just going to come back to check out the new character. They'll play it for a week or 2, and then they're going to be gone for, you know, again, multiple weeks. You know, maybe even a week. They'll come in and play it for a week, and then they'll be gone for another 3 to 4 weeks, and maybe they'll come back when the next character comes out. Because to me, if you don't really ever solve the root of any problem, you're not going to be able to keep people consistently long term. And a lot of the reasons, obviously, is stuff I've stated because of core gameplay issues. I think just sort of changes like the one they just made with that 30% less healing. That's just another thing. And I'm kind of curious if that affects higher rank more or lower rank. I would think higher rank because of the higher healing numbers and because players survive longer, meaning they you know, end up requiring more healing just because the fights are probably a bit longer, whereas at lower elo, people are out of position pretty consistently and will feed a lot. But it feels bad at all ranks, right? And at low rank, you know, obviously supports aren't as consistent in terms of being able to heal people. And also, again, because people probably take more damage, at least in bursts, because of positioning mistakes, that feels really bad. I don't know, man. It doesn't feel good. I think it just makes all the roles feel shittier. I don't think it's really excellent for the game. And it's weird that they do something like this. This game has definitely suffered power creep. Every game does to an extent, but I was just kind of shocked at how much the power creep is, and a lot of the new characters feel like just upgraded versions of the old ones. But it's kind of surprising that they do something like this when it's very obvious that everything else in the game has been power crept. So in this case, it's kind of strange from a design philosophy that they're doing that. I don't know necessarily why. I think it's maybe because they're sort of seeing the repercussions of the power creep, I guess. And that's a design problem that a lot of multiplayer games have, is power creep, and it's very rare you see stuff get nerfed substantially. People typically, for whatever reason, prefer to only see buffs all the time, but then you kind of speed up everything to the point where it doesn't really feel like the same gameplay loop anymore. But anyway, in terms of 5v5, I don't really know. I would suspect most tank players do not like 5v5. They don't prefer it to 6v6. On average, the vast majority, I would say. There's probably people, of course, on every role that do or don't prefer it, but I would assume they don't. In terms of DPS, the general gist I've gotten, or from anecdotal stuff, it seems that at least hitscan DPS players probably heavily prefer Overwatch 2, and I know why. It's because there's not an off tank to harass you, so your firing lines are much more open, gives you much more of a free, sort of just free shots on the enemy, makes life a lot easier, and it just kind of gives you, like, it just gives you onus to basically kind of do whatever you want more consistently, which I don't think is particularly good for balance. I wouldn't say that's very balanced, but if you're somebody who plays the role, it just allows you to get more value inherently, right? And it's just less challenging in that sense. I do know projectile DPS players I don't think like 5v5 as much, as they can't put down as consistent of damage. They're more based around maybe burst damage and some chip damage. Probably more chip damage on average, though, which obviously isn't as good in 5v5 and isn't really as good in Overwatch 2 in general. In terms of supports, I don't know necessarily what the case is there. I'm kind of curious if supports prefer 5v5 or 6v6. I don't really know. I think it depends on what supports you like and how you play. I think if you're more of a... I don't know. It's hard to say, like, because I'm kind of just making judgments based on kind of, like, logic and not necessarily purely based off of, like, numbers or statistics. It makes me wonder if you're more of a kind of aggressive playmaking style support, if you'd prefer 5v5. And then more of the people who prefer to just be, like, primary healers, they prefer 6v6. I could be completely wrong on that. But, you know, I just don't think 5v5, this game's really going anywhere with it. This game's not going to, I think, substantially grow its player count. I think, you know, maybe the same people are going to come back to play casually. The same hardcores are going to be the same hardcores, but I think this is a problem with both Rivals and Overwatch, is these games haven't really been able to grow themselves that much as of late, and they've kind of, I still think, even though, you know, sure, they'll get people to come back sometimes that have left, they're not bringing new people in, really. I don't think they're bringing new players in, partially because these games are hard to just pick up. If you've never played them before, you're going to get crushed. Sort of like a MOBA in that sense, but I think, like, they don't... I think because of some of these systemic problems, I also think it makes it hard for new players to get into it. And I think it even makes it hard for more casual people to want to play it more religiously. I think people that are very hardcore are willing to put up with the systemic issues with the game. They're more willing to tolerate it because I guess maybe they still have fun with the game, or maybe they're just flat out addicted to it. I don't know. But like I said earlier, I think casual players are much less likely to put up with stuff they don't like. They're less likely to just straight up tolerate it. And again, wait for... They're less likely to just sit and keep playing the game while they wait for changes. They're probably more likely to stop playing, and then if maybe something changes in the future, they'll come back. Whereas maybe the hardcores are more willing to sit and advocate for stuff, but continue to play the game during that, even while advocating for stuff and maybe being frustrated with it. But like I said, neither of these games are really growing players. From what I've seen on Steam charts at least. I don't know about console. It's possible I'm wrong in that sense, but I don't know how these games are really going to grow in the future, if they're going to be capable of doing that. And it's fine for them to have their communities. That's good. I mean, it's important to just, if you can keep your community, that's more important than anything. I mean, you could be like Call of Duty and Battlefield right now, where they're both bleeding players like fucking crazy. That's worse. You know, if they can at least stay stable, that's good, because I felt for a long time these games were both like I know Rivals was hemorrhaging players for a period of time as well, but this game had been losing players for quite some time too. And I think it has stabilized a little bit, but you know, I probably won't be around too long. And for me, I'm not somebody who's going to come back for just one hero. I'm not that interested in the game that I'm going to continue to come back every time a hero gets released. I'm not going to reinstall the game. I don't have fast enough internet to do that constantly. Every time a hero comes out, I don't have enough hard drive space. You know, so for me, one hero's not really going to do it. So maybe I'm somebody that I'll be back in 6 months or something when there's like half a dozen more heroes in the game, even though it's going to be overwhelming as shit. You know, at that point, maybe the game would be more different, more different. That's not even a term. It will be more drastically different. But yeah, so to me, I think at least for the health of the game, they should probably get rid of this 30% reduced healing, at least in a lot of the modes. I'm not sure, again, how 5v5 feels from every role's perspective, as I don't really play 5v5 a lot. And when I play 5v5, again, I don't really play all the roles in that in particular. In 6v6, I'm more willing to play all the roles, because because it's open queue, but 5v5, yeah, as of late, I've really only played DPS mainly. I don't really have fun playing tank in 5v5, and support, especially with the healing nerfs, feels worse in general. Especially the supports I like to play, which is a lot of the older school ones. And it just doesn't feel really good playing some of the older school tanks against some of the more modern power crept stuff. And I get it. I mean, I should learn how to play a lot of this stuff, but it feels weird that even if you have a decently sized hero pool from, you know, playing Overwatch 1, you still feel like you're in a weird spot if you haven't fully learned the new characters. You have people that kind of only play the newer stuff, and it feels like they sometimes have the upper hand because of it. But anyway, but yeah, that's just sort of stuff I've noted. Rivals is kind of in a spot where I'm not really interested in playing it unless I have a group of people that want to play it with me. This game, I think, is definitely better solo queue than Rivals is. But again, this is the type of game that I don't personally find it enjoyable enough to play solo queue. It's not complete torture or anything, but it's still just not particularly super fun. It's just okay. I kind of feel nothing towards it. I can have some fun playing this game with other people, but yeah, it's just kind of unfortunate that these games also punish people for playing in stacks by giving you crazy hard games. Kind of feels like it's dissuading you from playing it in a sort of team style. But that's not really anything new. I think if Rivals made it so you could stack during placements, because I know right now you can only 3-stack in Ranked and Rivals if anybody in your stack is in placements. I'd kind of prefer if you know, obviously there has to be a limit on the elo difference between players. But obviously the guy in placements probably has a hidden MMR, and that should obviously come into the equation. Obviously, you don't want high-ranked people duoing with lower-ranked people in placements, and that's how it is in Overwatch, right? But in Overwatch, I think you can stack pretty heavily in placements. Not that that's encouraged or anything, because it'll give you ridiculously hard games. And not that Rivals doesn't give you harder games, but... You know, like I said, I just think it kind of makes the game less accessible for people that want to play in a stack. And I think these games are inherently more fun when you play in a stack as opposed to playing by yourself. Even if the games solo are easier. It's just sad that, again, if you want to get high rank, it feels that it's kind of a necessity to not play in big stacks. Maybe at most you duo, but it is what it is. And again, that's something that's been the case for a long time. That's another issue with at least with ranked in these games that has never really been addressed in hero shooters, I feel. It might not be a problem to some, but, you know, it is what it is. Maybe at higher ranks, people don't feel as bad about it because the average level of play is a bit higher. But, you know, it is what it is. I still think having really good team coordination is the best way to play these games, is the most fun. So, yeah. I think that's probably about all I've got. Trying to think if there's any other points I want to make about this game going forward. Yeah, I think that's probably about it. I don't really care about the monetization at this point. I'm not going to sit and rant about that. It's stuff costs too much, obviously. It is what it is. Nothing's going to change regarding that. I don't really care about skins anymore. I know they favor certain characters way more, which is unfortunate. They only care about what sells, not trying to spread around skins to different characters. It is what it is. Maybe it's that stuff to me isn't like game breaking. It's just kind of a nuisance, but you know, it is what it is. I'm just, you know, I'm kind of disillusioned in general with a lot of multiplayer games, a lot of live service games. I just don't like a lot of stuff. And I feel like a lot of modern games are very manipulative too, so with matchmaking and with other systems trying to keep you playing, and you know, that's a commentary for a different day. But anyway, appreciate anybody who listened to it. If you agree, disagree, go ahead and let me know. But that's all I got for this commentary, so adios.